The subtle art of not giving a f is not just about being indifferent, it's about being comfortable being different. If you want to stop feeling overwhelmed by modern expectations, find clarity in your personal values, and finally focus on what actually moves the needle in your life, this book is essential. Originally published in 2016, this anti-self-help guide remains a global bestseller because it rejects the idea that we should be happy all the time. With over 20 million copies sold, it has defined a generation's approach to mental resilience by teaching us that we have a limited amount of energy to give, so we better spend it on things that are worth the struggle. The author's journey. Mark Manson didn't start as a traditional guru. He started as a blogger who was tired of the positive vibes only movement. After years of traveling the world and observing human behavior, he realized that our obsession with feeling good was actually making us more miserable. He wrote this book to share a hard-hitting philosophy born from his own trials and errors, that a meaningful life is built not on avoiding problems, but on finding better problems to solve. This summary is for the overthinker, the people pleaser, and anyone who feels like they are constantly running a race they didn't sign up for. In this video, I'll break down the entire book, chapter by chapter, covering every important principle so that by the end, you'll understand its core message completely. We aren't just going to look at the surface level advice, we are going to dive into the psychology of why we care too much about the wrong things and how to systematically reprioritize your life. By the time we reach the end, you will have a clear framework for deciding what is worth your limited time and what you should simply let go. Chapter 1. Don't try. The core principle of this chapter is the backwards law. This is the psychological idea that the more you pursue feeling better all the time, the less satisfied you become, because pursuing something only reinforces the fact that you lack it in the first place. Manson argues that modern culture has trapped us in a feedback loop from hell. We feel anxious about being anxious, or guilty about feeling guilty. We are bombarded with images of perfect lives, which makes us feel that something is wrong with us if we aren't constantly crushing it. The psychology here is simple. Accepting your negative experience is itself a positive experience, but craving a positive experience is, in itself, a negative one. Manson uses the story of the famous writer Charles Bukowski to illustrate this. Bukowski was a loser for most of his life, a heavy drinker and a failed writer. Even after he became successful, he didn't pretend to be a polished hero. On his tombstone, the epitaph reads, "Don't try." The lesson isn't to be lazy, it's about honesty. Bukowski's success didn't come from a desire to be a winner, but from his ability to be completely comfortable with the fact that he was a mess. He didn't waste energy trying to be something he wasn't. To apply this, stop trying to fix every negative emotion. If you feel a bit crummy today, just acknowledge it. Stop giving a F about the fact that you feel bad. When you stop obsessing over being happy, you actually gain the mental space to focus on things that are truly important. True confidence and peace come from being okay with not being okay, rather than trying to be perfect. Chapter 2. Happiness is a problem. The core principle of this chapter is that happiness is not a destination, but an activity. Manson argues that we've been sold a lie, that if we just get the right job, the right partner, or the right car, we will finally arrive at happiness. In reality, happiness comes from solving problems, not from having no problems at all. Our brains are biologically wired to solve problems. Once we solve one, a new one inevitably pops up. If you avoid problems or pretend you don't have them, you make yourself miserable. Chronic dissatisfaction is actually an evolutionary tool that keeps us moving and innovating. The psychology here is that life is a series of problems, and the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your problems. Manson shares the story of the young prince who would eventually become the Buddha. His father, the king, tried to protect him from all suffering by keeping him within the palace walls surrounded by luxury. But the prince grew bored and miserable. He eventually escaped and saw the reality of sickness, old age, and death. He then tried the opposite, extreme poverty and self-denial, and realized that was just as miserable. The lesson is that suffering is inevitable. Whether you are rich or poor, you will suffer. The secret to a good life is not to ask, how can I stop suffering, but rather, what is the pain that I am willing to sustain? To apply this, ask yourself, what struggle am I willing to tolerate? Everyone wants a great physique, but only those who enjoy the pain of the gym get one. Everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, but only those who tolerate the pain of 80-hour work weeks and repeated failures succeed. Choose your struggle, and you choose your success. Happiness is a constant work in progress because solving problems is a constant work in progress. Chapter 3. You are not special. The core principle of this chapter is the rejection of entitlement. Manson argues that modern self-help and parenting trends have mistakenly told everyone they are special, unique, or destined for greatness simply for existing. This creates a dangerous psychological trap where we feel we deserve success without actually earning it. When we believe we are special, we become entitled. Entitlement manifests in two ways. Either you believe you are amazing and everyone else is beneath you, or you believe you are uniquely victimized and the world owes you something because of your suffering. Both are forms of narcissism because they suggest your experience is more important than everyone else's. The reality is that most of us are fairly average at most things, and that's actually okay. Manson describes a character named Jimmy, a man who was always starting new business ventures, always networking, and always talking about his next big million-dollar idea. To an outsider, Jimmy seemed confident, but in reality, he was a deadbeat who lived off his parents and treated people poorly. The lesson? Jimmy's high self-esteem was actually a delusion. He felt he was so special that he didn't need to do the actual hard work required to succeed. He was addicted to the feeling of being important rather than the reality of being competent. To apply this, you must accept your ordinariness. This doesn't mean you can't achieve great things. It means you recognize that greatness is only achieved through thousands of hours of boring, average effort. When you stop obsessing over being extraordinary, you free yourself from the pressure of constant comparison and the anxiety of not being enough. You can finally focus on the actual work in front of you. True self-worth is not found in how special you feel, but in how you handle your own mediocrity. Chapter 4. The Value of Suffering. The core principle of this chapter is that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your values. Suffering is inevitable, but if you suffer for a noble or productive cause, that suffering becomes meaningful. If you suffer for shallow or external reasons, your life will feel empty. Manson explains that we all have metrics by which we measure our success and failure. Many people use shitty values, things like being right all the time, staying positive, or being liked by everyone. These are bad values because they are outside of your control. Good values are process-oriented, reality-based, and socially constructive. The psychology here is that if you change how you measure your life, you change how you experience your pain. Manson tells the incredible story of Hiroo Onoda, a Japanese soldier who stayed on an island in the Philippines for 30 years after World War II ended, believing the war was still going on. He lived in the jungle, suffered from hunger and disease, and killed locals, all because he valued loyalty to the emperor above all else. The lesson? Onoda's suffering was immense, but to him it was meaningful because of his values. However, when he finally returned to Japan, he found a modernized world that didn't care about his sacrifice. He realized his metric was outdated. This shows that you can endure almost anything if you have a why, but if your why is based on a false reality, your life becomes a tragedy. To apply this, audit your own metrics. Are you measuring your worth by how much money you make, an external metric, or by how much integrity you have, an internal metric? When you choose better values like honesty, vulnerability, or curiosity, your suffering suddenly has a purpose. You stop crying over small inconveniences and start focusing on growth. You don't get to choose if you suffer. You only get to choose what you suffer for. Chapter 5. You are always choosing. The core principle of this chapter is the responsibility-fault fallacy. Manson argues that while we are not always to blame for what happens to us, we are always responsible for how we respond to it. Taking 100% responsibility for your life is the only way to gain true power over it. Most people confuse responsibility with fault. If someone hits your car, it is their fault, but it is your responsibility to deal with the insurance, the repairs, and your own anger. When we treat our problems as someone else's responsibility, we effectively give away our power to solve them. The psychology here is about internal versus external locus of control. By choosing to own your reaction to every situation, you shift from being a passive victim to an active participant in your own life. Manson shares the story of William James, the father of American psychology. In his youth, James was sickly, depressed, and considered himself a failure. He contemplated suicide. However, he decided to perform a one-year experiment. He would live as if he were 100% responsible for everything that happened in his life, regardless of whether it was his fault. The lesson: James discovered that by taking responsibility for his beliefs and actions, he could change his entire reality. He went on to become one of the most influential thinkers in history. The lesson is that the simple act of choosing to be responsible, even for things you didn't cause, is the foundation of mental health. To apply this, stop asking, "Who did this to me?" and start asking, "What am I going to do about it?" Whether you were fired, dumped, or born into a difficult situation, you have the choice of how to interpret that event. You can choose to see it as a permanent roadblock or a challenge to overcome. When you realize you are always choosing your reaction, you realize you are never truly stuck. We cannot always choose what happens to us, but we always choose how we value the experience. Chapter 6. You're wrong about everything, but so am I. The core principle of this chapter is the law of avoidance. Manson argues that the more something threatens to change how you view yourself, the more you will avoid it. Growth is an iterative process of being less wrong each day, rather than suddenly finding the truth. Our brains are meaning-making machines, but they are incredibly unreliable. We suffer from confirmation bias, faulty memories, and a desperate need to be right to protect our egos. The psychology here is that certainty is the enemy of growth. When we are certain we are a victim or certain we are a genius, we close ourselves off to new information. True personal development happens when we embrace uncertainty and realize that our current beliefs are likely flawed. Manson shares a personal story about a time he was convinced someone had stolen his car. He felt righteous anger and was ready to call the police, only to realize later that he had simply parked it in a different spot and forgotten. The lesson? The lesson is that our minds can manufacture entire realities to fit our current emotional state. If Manson could be so wrong about something as objective as where he parked his car, imagine how wrong we are about subjective things like our destiny, our worth, or our enemies. To apply this, start asking yourself 3 difficult questions. 1. What if I'm wrong? 2. What would it mean if I were wrong? And 3. Would being wrong create a better or worse problem than my current one? By constantly questioning your own narratives, you become less defensive and more open to change. Instead of trying to be right, strive to be less wrong tomorrow than you were today. Growth is not a journey from wrong to right, but from wrong to slightly less wrong. Chapter 7. Failure is the way forward. The core principle of this chapter is the do something principle. Manson argues that most people wait for motivation to strike before they take action, but in reality, action is both the cause and the effect of motivation. If you are stuck, simply doing anything, even failing, creates the momentum needed to succeed. We often avoid failure because it threatens our ego, but Manson points out that we can only be successful at something we are willing to fail at. When we avoid failure, we avoid growth. The psychology here is a three-part loop: action, inspiration, motivation. Most people wait for inspiration first, but by reversing the order and starting with action, you bypass the fear of not knowing what to do. Failure provides the data points necessary to refine your approach. Manson references a study where a pottery class was divided into two groups, one graded on quality, 1 perfect pot, and one graded on quantity, 50 pounds of pots. By the end of the term, the quantity group, those who failed repeatedly and made dozens of mess-ups, actually produced the highest quality pots. The lesson. The lesson is that the path to excellence is paved with a mountain of mistakes. Those who failed more often learned more than those who sat around theorizing about perfection. Perfectionism is just a fancy word for the fear of being average or wrong. To apply this, lower your standards for taking the first step. If you want to write a book, tell yourself you'll just write 3 terrible sentences today. If you want to start a business, just buy the domain name. By making the action small enough that failure is irrelevant, you break the paralysis of overthinking. Once you do something, the next step becomes clear. Success is a game of who can fail the most and keep going, not who can avoid failing the most.
Chapter 8. The Importance of Saying No. The core principle of this chapter is that rejection is a necessary tool for liberation. Manson argues that to truly value something, you must reject everything that is not that thing. If you try to say yes to everyone and everything, you effectively stand for nothing, and your life becomes a hollow pursuit of pleasing others. We live in a culture that encourages us to keep our options open and have it all. However, the psychology of choice shows that more options often lead to less satisfaction. This is known as the paradox of choice. When we refuse to reject anything, we avoid commitment. Without commitment, there is no depth. Whether it's a career, a relationship, or a hobby, depth is where the real juice of life is found, and you can only reach depth by saying no to the distractions that pull you away. Manson reflects on his travels to Russia, where he noticed a stark cultural difference. In the West, we are often fake nice to avoid conflict. We say yes when we mean no to spare feelings. In Russia, people were brutally honest. If something was stupid, they said it was stupid. The lesson isn't to be rude, but to realize that honesty requires rejection. When we are honest about what we don't like or what we won't tolerate, we build trust. Trust is the foundation of any healthy relationship. If you can't say no to your partner or they can't say no to you, you don't have a relationship. You have a hostage situation. To apply this, start setting firm boundaries. Stop attending events you hate just to be polite. Stop chasing people who don't value you. By narrowing your focus and rejecting the clutter of mediocre opportunities, you create space for the few things that actually matter. Commitment to one thing gives you more freedom than chasing everything. You are defined by what you choose to reject. If you reject nothing, you have no identity.
Chapter 9. And then you die. The core principle of this chapter is memento mori, the ancient practice of reflecting on your own mortality. Manson argues that death is the only thing that gives life meaning. Without the scarcity of time, our choices wouldn't matter. By keeping death in your peripheral vision, you gain the ultimate perspective on what is truly worth your energy. Human beings are the only animals capable of conceptualizing our own end. To cope with this terror, we create immortality projects, attempts to leave a mark on the world through fame, wealth, or legacy. The psychology here is that when we fear death, we fear life. We become obsessed with trivialities because we are trying to distract ourselves from the inevitable. However, when we accept that we will eventually cease to exist, the small stuff, like a rude comment or a failed project, loses its power over us. Manson cites the work of Ernest Becker, who wrote The Denial of Death. Becker argued that all human conflict stems from our inability to face our mortality. We cling to ideologies and possessions to feel permanent. The lesson. The lesson is that once you accept your ordinariness and your mortality, you are finally free. You realize that you have nothing to lose. You can stop trying to be a legend and start being a decent human being. Death is the ultimate filter. It washes away everything that isn't authentic. To apply this, use the deathbed test. When you are faced with a difficult decision or a stressful situation, ask yourself, will I care about this when I'm 80 years old and looking back? Most of the things we stress about, what people think of us or failing at a new hobby, completely vanish under this lens. Living with death in mind allows you to live with more courage and less pretense. The only way to be comfortable with death is to live a life that is defined by something bigger than your own ego. Overall summary. At its core, the subtle art of not giving a fuck teaches that a meaningful life is not about the absence of suffering, but about finding the right things to suffer for. We live in a world of infinite choices and constant comparisons, which leads to a feedback loop from hell where we feel bad about feeling bad. Manson's philosophy serves as a psychological clearing of the brush, stripping away the superficial goals of modern society like constant positivity, being liked by everyone, and being special, to reveal what actually leads to a grounded, resilient life. The transformation this book promises is freedom through limitation. By choosing to care deeply about only a few high-quality values like honesty, vulnerability, and taking responsibility, you naturally stop caring about the thousands of trivial things that used to drain your energy. You stop trying to be happy and start being okay with the struggle that leads to true satisfaction. Influence isn't about external validation or having a life free of conflict. It's about the internal courage to choose your own struggle. It's about accepting that you are wrong more often than you are right, that you are not special in your suffering, and that you are 100% responsible to your reaction to every hand life deals you. When you connect this to real life, it looks like this. Instead of chasing a promotion because you want to look successful, a shallow metric, you chase it because you value the problem of leading a team or solving complex issues, a growth metric. When your values align with reality, your life stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like an experience. Personal reflection. What changed for me after reading this was my relationship with social anxiety. I used to care way too much about what strangers thought of me in public. After applying the deathbed test from Chapter 9, I realized that the opinion of someone I'll never see again is a low-tier metric. Once I stopped giving a fuck about being cool, I actually became more relaxed and approachable. The result? I started having better conversations and making more genuine friends. By narrowing my focus to just being honest, I removed the exhausting weight of trying to be perfect. Critical analysis. The strongest point this book makes is the responsibility-fault fallacy. It is the ultimate antidote to the victim mentality. Even if you aren't at fault for a tragedy, owning the responsibility for your healing is the only way to move forward. What did the book get wrong? Some critics argue that Manson's tone can be overly cynical and that he occasionally simplifies complex psychological issues. For instance, while choosing better values is powerful, it doesn't account for clinical depression or systemic poverty where mindset alone cannot fix the environment. Additionally, the "don't try" mantra could be misinterpreted by a younger audience as a reason to be lazy, when in reality it's about directed, honest effort rather than lack of effort. Conclusion. If you found this summary of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck valuable, and it helped you gain some perspective on your own metrics, I truly appreciate you spending your time here with me. Your attention is the most valuable thing you have, and I'm honored you shared it with this channel. If you're ready to stop stressing over the small stuff and start living by your own rules, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm find other people who need this message. If you want to join a community of people dedicated to intentional living, click subscribe and turn on the notification bell. The question of the day. I want to hear from you in the comments below. What is one low-level thing you are officially going to stop giving your energy to today? Let's hold each other accountable. I post 3 deep dive book summaries every week, covering everything from ancient philosophy to modern psychology to help you master your mindset and build a life that actually feels good on the inside, not just looks good on the outside. Thank you once again for your incredible support. I truly wish you the clarity to see what matters and the courage to let go of what doesn't. May your week be filled with better problems and meaningful struggles. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.